From Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Let me get myself slightly set up here. As a mercy to the poor staff here, I'm not going to use the whole half an hour. I'm going to just try to run through a couple of concepts. Did a little tripping up of some details last week where we were trying to explain some of the things we see going on in the math. And I want to walk through a concept. We actually right now as a country are remarkably blessed. The GDP growth, the economic growth is actually well beyond almost any of, even my economists were predicting over the last year. We're seeing some data right now if you actually look at the Atlanta Fed's GDP Nowcast, some of these, we could hit a 5 handle this quarter, which is just like remarkable. We actually think some of the data from the third quarter of 25 looks like it's the number of a 4.3% GDP growth is going to hold up. These numbers are actually remarkable. And I want to make a point here for the annualized 25 GDP number. And I know this is geeky, but there's a point I'm going to come to. And that's the irony that tax collections don't look as robust as the economy. We're going to try to explain what's going on, and this is why getting policy right is going to become so critical. The first quarter of last year, so 1 year ago this quarter, we actually had negative GDP. So the first quarter, when the Trump administration started, when our new Congress started, we actually had to go through 3 months of slower growth. And then it wasn't till the second quarter, third quarter, and now we believe the fourth quarter. We don't have that final number in yet. We finally hit the acceleration pedal. But what's going on out there? We have this irony happening where we have really actually stable and much broader economic growth than we expected, but we're actually seeing some odd things. Labor force participation, actually, it's pretty flat. It actually, we had a small tick up in some of the last unemployment data, and also, if you look at this chart here, we're trying to explain the difference between, here's the number of folks who are entering the labor force, they're working. Here's the number of folks who are available for working. And when you start to get at that like 4.4, 4.6% unemployment, you're actually, if you look at our historic average of even the last 25 years, that's almost full employment. But yet, you see this curve here? It basically is starting to demonstrate the demographics of America. It's also sort of the demographics of the entire industrialized world. You have a situation, remember, today we functionally have the same number of 18-year-olds as we had 20 years ago. But today we also have almost double the number of our brothers and sisters who are 65 and up than 25 years ago. And that's creating an interesting irony. So we actually take a look here at what we call tax receipts. Most people like to call them tax collections. If you're on Ways and Means, they're tax receipts. Look at this interesting spike here. That's actually tax receipts, that's good. But almost every dime you see on this chart of the real growth is actually capital gains. It's those who've had assets, those who've sold real estate, those who've sold stocks. But the tax receipts really coming in from labor, they're good, they're stable, but they're not growing nearly in sympathy, if you're going to play economist words, in sympathy to the GDP growth. And this is an important part of what I wanted to come share and I'm trying to, I hate this term, socialize the concept. What happens when you're producing growth because we got a lot of the growth policies right, last summer, earlier in the year, where investment is going into plant and equipment and data centers and AI and all these things are happening, wage growth is actually okay. It's actually outpacing inflation now, finally, thank heaven. But the real GDP growth is coming from that capital spend and not from wage and new employment and the demand for labor. Understand why this is a problem. You're an income tax base country. Income taxes on businesses, but mostly income tax base on working, and also FICA, the Social Security tax, the Medicare tax, the unemployment tax. Those are taxed on your wages. And we're starting to see this irony where we're actually doing some data that says what happens when you hit this type of GDP growth and at the same time the amount of borrowing and debt in the country is still going to stay remarkably high. We still have a model that we think will be a bit less, but we could be still approaching $2 trillion of borrowing this year. I hope we're wrong. But you got to understand, the first quarter of this fiscal year, I think we were borrowing about $90,000 a second. So far this fiscal year, so we're what? 3 months, 10 or 11 days into it, I think we've now borrowed $800 billion. So sometimes, maybe before this month's over, we're going to have borrowed another $1 trillion. This time it wasn't 3 months, it might be coming in 4 months. And you shouldn't be seeing those types of borrow with this type of economic growth. And the point I'm going to is, why is the borrowing going up? Look at the spending data. And I didn't bring all those charts because they're exhausting. But if you take a look, interest, remember, we have to refinance 10 or maybe $11 trillion this year. So that means the bonds that were sold in the past have to come back to market, refinance, and they're being refinanced for many of them at much higher interest rates. The other thing is healthcare. But it's healthcare Medicare. We have a model that says now in less than 6.5, 7 years, Medicare will go from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. Also in 7 years, Medicare's gone. Well, excuse me, let me rephrase it. The Medicare Trust Fund is gone. And that will result in like an 11% cut, particularly to hospitals. It's demographics. Baby boomers are moving into their peak utilization years of these benefits. We're in functionally, I think, the last 3 years, 4 years of baby boomers moving into their age 65 and getting their earned benefits. But so you see this shift in the labor market. What happens if the formulas that I had come behind these microphones for years and said, if we can grow another 1 point of GDP, it's this many hundreds of billions of dollars of tax receipts. And now it isn't. And look, I know this is geeky, but it's really, really important because it means many of the budget documents that the brain trust around here talks about, we may be getting wrong. Many of the solutions we've had for taking on debt and deficits. There's a piece of legislation, I'm absolutely elated, I'm trying to get on it. It basically says, look, let's do a debt and deficit commission. Like we did BRAC many, many, many years ago to close excess military bases. And let's go for 3% of GDP growth. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, but there's a problem with that number. Just our interest coverage is over 3% of our economy. So we're going to cut down, we're going to take spending and get it down to 3%. Great! So we're going to stop borrowing so much, except just the interest we pay is bigger than that. Anyone see the math problem? So this is actually the punchline I've been trying to head towards. This is a chart that sort of shows labor as a percentage of income. And I'm sorry, but this is actually really important when you're trying to design how you finance your government. We're hitting a time way down here. So this is 2024, because that's the last sort of good data point I have, we actually believe it's actually fallen further. For years, 64, even times we crossed over to 66% of our income basically came from labor, that financed the government. Today, we're down to touching, actually, we may be as low as 53%. That's a huge difference. And it's going to force us, those who care about the economics, those of us in the Ways and Means Committee that actually have to do tax policy, those who actually are paying attention to our bonds and our promise to pay back $30+ trillion of publicly sold debt, another $8.5 trillion that we've borrowed internally. How do we pay it back? And we're going to have to start thinking about the taxation on labor is going to be becoming a problem. So look, I want to bounce around a little bit because a couple days ago we got some of the inflation data, but with that also came some of the state and localized inflation data. And I thought this one was interesting, and I'm going to be a little caustic on it, but I haven't had as much coffee today, so I'm not wound up as tight. So at least I'm not speaking like a machine gun. We thought this was interesting. Increase in monthly costs in Arizona. And we thought we'd do a snapshot. I'm blessed. I represent the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. So between September 21 and, January 21 to September 21. So we're actually doing the same snapshot of time. If you lived in the Phoenix area, you functionally lost $1,597 to inflation. And that's for the average family. Now, we come here to 2025. It's still not as good as we demand we get it to. But it's now $944, a $653 savings. So that's 1 year of the success of Republicans lowering inflation. We got to get it further. But when you actually see how bad it was before, because this was the inflation that was handed to this country during Biden's first year, and then we start to take a look at we're making progress. It's not as good as I want, but understand this is the reality of the math. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, I have a fixation that we tell the truth and sort of get an understanding of some of the math. And one of the most difficult things is we've been trying to figure out how do we make sure we preserve our promises. We owe a promise for Medicare. We owe a promise for Social Security. We have to deal with the reality in less than 3 years, over half of everything this Congress will spend. So over half of everything the federal government will spend will go to people 65 and up. And why that's just an amazing thing to think about. In the 1970s, for every dollar it went to someone 65 and up, there were $6, $7 spent for those 18 and younger. Today, that's flipped. And it's just demographics. It's not some evil plot. It's a combination of the baby boomers, a big population bubble, and healthcare got dramatically more expensive. And last week I did a presentation here and basically showed where Democrats turning healthcare into financial engineering instead of the incentives to do it better, faster, and cheaper. We've turned healthcare into, remember the whole debate here on subsidies on top of subsidies? When you turn healthcare into financing instead of helping people be healthier, you've screwed up the economics and the incentives. And we start to look at charts like this. Now, this is Medicare Advantage. I'm actually a big fan of what you call Medicare Part C, Medicare Advantage. And the chart's a little bit distorted because it doesn't really give you the population statistics. But we believe this year, 55% of the population of this country that are in Medicare are going to choose a Medicare Advantage plan. Okay, but we aren't telling the truth about the math. There's this things called the MedPAC reports. They're big orange reports like this, hundreds and hundreds of pages. And if you go through them, there'll be this section in there that says, hey, Turns out Medicare Advantage is coming in, according to the MedPAC report, and this is the room full of people that specialize in this, and I hate to say my own joint economic economist, and the CMS data and the HHS data, and the Wall Street Journal, everyone else that looks into this, it's coming in at 120% of fee-for-service. Why this is a big deal? When Medicare Advantage was designed, really came into effect in 2005, Senator Frisk, who's a doctor, they put together a plan with this idea that we're going to do managed care. The insurance companies, which are going to be basically the gatekeeper, are going to make profit by helping our brothers and sisters on the program be healthier. And the model was it was going to come in at 95% of fee-for-service. Today, it comes in at 120% of fee-for-service. That 25%, Madam Speaker, over 10 years is $2 trillion. So when we show a chart like this of the transition that's been happening for traditional fee-for-service Medicare to now Medicare Advantage, fine. But we're going to have the honest discussion of how do we get the incentives lined up, because you saw what Senator Grassley published yesterday. I was going to bring the report out here and use it as a prop and show it to you. But it's like this, and it basically talks about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. And look, the report, I'm only a third through it, but it's example after example of Medicare Advantage insurers either having companies or their own folks go out, knock on grandma's door, and score them as sicker, and therefore getting bonuses for having a sicker population. The Wall Street Journal, almost 2 years ago, did a major expose on a person, I think they were in Sun City, Arizona, and the insurance company had scored them, I think, as having HIV. Except the problem is this person didn't have that. They'd never been tested for it. But the insurance company was getting a bonus for that. It's called risk scoring. We're going to have to consider moving to a model that says we're not going to let you go and score people differently. We want to create a model where put it in the initial pricing of the program, and then you make money by helping the senior population be healthier. There's so many miracles right now, the technology, it can be worn, the ways you can keep track, the ways telehealth, digital health, all these other things. We want a system that incentivizes investing in people's health instead of profiting from claiming they're sicker. And you got to understand, we actually have a piece of legislation to do this. Preliminary scores, $1.840 trillion of savings. So we're going to fight, knife fight, and complain and cry and fuss at each other over things that are absolutely tiny. We've been told this piece of legislation actually is the biggest savings bill in U.S. history. And I beg of anyone that actually cares about these subjects of taking on debt and deficits, help us explain it to our brothers and sisters, help us take on, which will be, let's be honest, a barrage of hate from the brokers, from the insurance companies that don't want a system that lines up the incentives properly. But these were the incentives of the original design of Medicare Advantage. And it got perverse by Obamacare. They changed parts of the quality ratings that created another bonus system that could be manipulated. We can fix things like this, but are we allowed to actually say, we're going to fix something on Medicare? And so often that sets off fear. Did I mention in the beginning here, you got less than 7 years and the Medicare trust fund is gone? If we're going to preserve these earned entitlements, these are earned programs. You worked for years, you earned this. This was part of the societal contract. But people like me here, we got to figure out how to finance this, keep it going. And yet, it's almost a sin around here to talk about the problems. The fact we're hemorrhaging cash. We're borrowing this year for every dollar we take in tax receipts. We're going to spend $1.43. The Moody's model says in 8 years, interest will consume 30% of all of our tax receipts. This isn't a game. We got to stop the juvenile discussions we have around here and start facing the really big, difficult things we have ahead of us. Because this is us. May look like a chart with a handful of different blues on it, but this is actually us as a people. And what this chart is telling you, in less than 3 years, over half of all of our spending in this government will go to our brothers and sisters who are 65 and up. Okay, if that's the societal deal we made it. But we have an obligation as members of Congress to make it work. And if we know there's hundreds of billions of dollars, let's not use the word fraud, being misallocated. Let's get fancy on the language. We'll call it misallocated. Why wouldn't everyone line up with us? I'd argue the army of lobbyists outside our doors here who lose their mind every time I talk about this, who scare the crap out of us, we still got to do the right thing. Because someone running for the United States Senate today, in your first term, if blessed enough to win, you're going to have to deal with the fact the Social Security Trust Fund is gone, the Medicare Trust Fund is gone, and our preliminary math says in 2033, the first year that those trust funds are gone, it's $638 billion just to make up that shortfall. This isn't a game. These are numbers that should terrify you. And yet, for anyone who's crazy enough to be watching C-SPAN, how many times have you seen this week, last week, the week before that, members come behind these mics and talk to you about the real issues that will change this republic? Or have we just decided we're going to let the bond market basically run this country? And we're going to just keep pretending we can keep spending like this. And much of that spending is not Democrat policy, Republican policy. Look, I think much of the Democrat policy is absolutely absurd, but much of it's demographics. You know, in early 1990s and even going back further, you look at, we've had dramatically fewer children. Remember, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, we model the United States will be close to almost zero population growth this year. If you have a pay-as-you-go system, it's really hard to make that math work. But do you still let the scams, the misalignments, the taking advantage of these systems, the fraud? It means we're going to have to talk about it. We're going to have to dive into it. We're going to have to take on an army of lobbyists. They're probably going to run nasty ads against all of us because it's so much money. Let's step up and do the hard things. Let's step up and do the right things. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'll yield back.
Does the gentleman have a motion?
Madam Speaker, I make a motion that the House do stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor, say aye. Those opposed? The ayes